Hello and welcome to St. Louis and Me. I'm Theresa Petry. Today we're introducing you to Lindy Drew, a Washington University alumna who started Humans of St. Louis.
Everything about Humans of St. Louis is an extension of what I learned in classes at the Brown School, and it feeds the work. From every interview to every collaborative project that we have, to even building something out of nothing with this thing that's become a business now. The thing that I love the most is the conversation that's happening on the site. The fact that we've created a platform with such a following for people to jump into the conversation, to express their ideas, to give examples of where people could go for assistance or help in some cases, that has been phenomenal because I don't have the answers to all of these things, right? I hope it ultimately influences people to have conversations at the table with others, or to recognize the homeless person on the street that they might go by, or to say hi to someone who's of a different ethnicity or race than they are, or to start a conversation to say, wow, there's so much to learn about you as a human being. It's so important.
Lindy joins us today, as well as her co-worker, Yetunde. Thank you both so much for joining us. You know, as a former news reporter, I'm used to talking to strangers, but how hard is it to approach a random stranger on the street and just ask them to tell them their story?
No, that part's easy, actually. It wasn't easy in the beginning all the time, but once we kind of found our style, that's kind of the fun part. So this comfort, I think, comes from talking to so many people after a while and then feeling comfortable to approach them and ask if they have a moment in their day to have a conversation with a stranger, which then sometimes ends up becoming a friendship, or following each other online and seeing how both of our lives are kind of unfolding.
I think a part of it is just genuine curiosity. And that's one of the things that I really love about Hustle is it as a model, it kind of encourages people to follow their genuine curiosity about other human beings. I think also people generally want to be heard. So when I moved to St. Louis in 2004, I moved from Philadelphia, and I was really, really excited about public transportation. It was kind of a part of the culture that I came from. And I found myself talking to people all the time on the bus, on the metro, just smiling at a person. And suddenly we were in a conversation about a woman's son at home and how she felt about his grades or his friends, etc. And I think that the way that Lindy and the other hustlers approach people kind of invites them into that conversation.
A lot of people wonder, how do you approach someone? How do you start a conversation? To your point, Tunde, you end up having natural conversations all the time with people in your family or folks in your neighborhood, and it just kind of happens. Sometimes it's awkward for people on the receiving end to be approached, but I find that most of the time people are really happy about having someone walk along and say, I'm really curious to know a little bit about you. Tell me what's going on in your life. So we end that conversation, and it's usually a good thing and pretty positive. It has made me more aware of topics that I wouldn't have been aware of before. I show up the way that I do with how I was raised and the reasons that I came here. And just St. Louis in itself during this time, I got here in 2013, and I'm always going to have a foot in St. Louis for the foreseeable future. It's been a massive education in so many things about race, about gender identity, about reproductive rights, about any number of things. And so just when I think I'm getting a story about someone, it's okay, I see where you're coming from a little bit clearer. I might put it out there on the page, and then the audience is teaching me more. They're picking up on details of the story that I didn't realize before, or cluing me into what's going on politically or just in current events. And so I start to pay attention a lot more than I would if I wouldn't be spending my days talking to strangers who live very different lives than me. That education piece, I think, has been the biggest thing from doing this project. Yeah, actually, I think part of the premise of Humans of St. Louis is to kind of model for others that you too can talk to people who you don't normally see yourself talking to or running into, and having a conversation with someone to get to know them better and hence get to know your city better.
And what you're describing kind of sounds like journalism. Would you consider Humans of St. Louis more of a news or arts organization?
This question has come up before where folks were wondering, is Hostel a news organization? Is it an arts organization? I think it can be a little bit of both because of my background and a lot of the folks on the team who have studied or work in social work. I also look at a lot of the work that we do as social work. So, a lot of the ways that we're able to get permission from folks is to kind of social work it and let them know we are curious about how you feel. We want to know about your story, but we want you to be a part of making this in the process. And that's a huge part of, I think, why Hostel has been, succeed. Some folks have compared us to media sites, but I wouldn't look at it as like the public radio or the Post Dispatch. It's very different. We can also include like a snippet of what folks say, but we're not always showing like fair and balanced. I mean, if this is some person's story, when they're answering our question, that's just their story. We will fact check things to make sure that as folks are reading it, numbers, dates align. But for the most part, when I storytell, I'm really trusting people at their word for what they say. It might be a memory that's jogged and that's what they want to talk about, or it might be an opinion that they have. What I'm really looking for as a storyteller, and just like the psychology behind it, is to roll out the red carpet for someone by asking them a very open-ended question and giving them space to be able to answer it the way that they remember something happened, or from the feelings that they experienced when they want to talk about whatever issue it is they want to talk about. And then from there, we end up crafting it. So it's kind of a little bit of everything.
So like it's a collaborative process, whereas typically in journalism, the power rests within the writer or the journalist. Like the power rests within the hands of the person who is making the decision about what gets shown. So there, it feels like actually a pretty significant difference there in terms of like power that it's shared, and also in terms of the integrity of the story. While this isn't to say that there is not integrity in the way that stories are depicted in journalism, what higher form can there be than a person like directly sharing their own story, getting to look at a fairly unadulterated story, and then getting to like confirm and approve what they mean.
And I think that's important because, I've met people on the street before who have said some pretty intimate things and they feel comfortable sharing at that moment. But later, when I go back to say, do you want to put this story out there, like story A or story B? And they'll say, actually, let's not put story A out there, but I'm comfortable with story B. And I think that the process for the subject should be empowering, even if they're talking about really difficult things or they've gone through something difficult or they're currently experiencing something that's particularly hard. That social work part of it is that we want to respect that there's a way to empower them through that. And even putting their story up on the platform can be a really positive thing with how people respond or how they want to support or help out. Sometimes swipe their credit card, sometimes donate. It's like a little bit of everything.
Why did you decide on this venture? What is the benefit asking random people their stories?
I think it's kind of twofold. Like Tunde, I'd love to hear what you want to say about the power of storytelling and storytelling right now, and like hyper local storytelling too, like from our area. But I'll say from my point of view, after doing Humans of St. Louis for so long, I'm not from here either. I come from Phoenix, Arizona. I've lived here for about 8 years. I came for school. And as I was getting an education in the classroom, I was also getting an education on the streets by talking to people that I was meeting and making this artwork with them. So for me, the importance has been, I think, just being able to do my art at the intersection of social work and public health, but also coming to a city where people say, don't go to this area, don't cross the river, don't go over here. It's like, well, what happens if you do? And if you're able to have a conversation with someone, you get to learn a lot about them, about your city, about yourself. And for me, that's really important in a place that typically has so much division along so many lines. And when I find myself crossing those divides, whether I'm on my bicycle or it's through a conversation, it's a really beautiful moment to not just have it with a stranger, but also then share it largely so other people can also see how this can be emulated or learn something as well from what this subject that I'm meeting has said in like a fleeting moment.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that point about kind of the like stories that are told to newcomers in St. Louis. So I've lived here for 19 years this year, but I'm also not a St. Louis native. I'm a transplant. I came from Philadelphia, and I came here for school. And when I started at my school, there were so many resources available on the campus, from study spaces to like entertainment spaces, food spaces. Like they did a lot to really nurture the students, but it also kind of created a little bit of a barrier between folks who were attending for school and the community that existed outside of the campus environment. And I'd also get stories about like where students do go and where they don't. And my first year here, I think the narrative that I had was that St. Louis was not a very rich city, and that like we had everything we needed on campus and there absolutely wasn't any reason to leave. I was definitely planning on getting back to Philly as soon as I could and back to the East Coast and missing all of the richness that was there. And I think it was my sophomore year when I started taking some art classes and some dance classes that took me off campus that I just got really curious, because I'd have to take public transportation to get there. And I got curious about the communities that the bus was driving through. I got curious about the people that I was meeting and the stories that they were telling about events that they were going to, like block parties that they were attending, things that were happening in this world that I was living in and completely ignorant of. And I wanted to find out more about it. And me finding out more about St. Louis informed my decision to stay here. And that was something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, like, one of the things that feels really important is people being able to tell their own stories, because when you have an institution that like its goal is to like keep people in and like talk about the institution, the thing that gets missed sometimes is like what's happening outside of those walls. And St. Louis has so much. It is really complex, just like so many other cities and places in the country. There's a lot of beautiful history. There's a lot of like beautiful things happening today, right now. I think that people being able to tell their own stories, just woven into folks naturally talking about their own life, are pieces of that richness that come out. Like, oh, like me and my friend are going to Jazz Fest, or oh my gosh, like this is my 3-year-old. She really loved the balloon festival. And so these are just some things that we surface through the stories of the people that Hostel is interviewing.
I would actually say too, like so many times when we look at data of things, it's numbers and it's numbers related. And there's something about hosteling and going out on the street and talking to folks where you hear about their, which Tunde reminded me from working together, these very real people who have these very real stories. You put a face to it. And then it allows you to connect more to a topic or learn more about someone's identity or uncover something about yourself because you're able to, read what it is that this person is saying. And it's so important to be able to give people voice in a way that these are your words. We're not crafting it for you. Even organizations will approach us to say, can you hostel storytell for us? Which is kind of neat because they're not necessarily looking for content from a website to pull from, and they find some picture of someone that, could live in St. Louis or be from St. Louis. They actually want photos and very real stories from people who do live here, and then shows the background and all of that. So it's super multi-layered. Just the power of storytelling and how it's exploded, I think, and in the past couple of years is really neat too. And this is just one form and like one way to do it.
I want to like just push a little bit on a piece of that, which is that I think that it's important to note that these stories are data. There's a lot of focus, especially in like folks who have the power to make decisions, on quantitative data, and these hostel stories are qualitative data. So the stories of people that live in St. Louis and their real lived experience is information that can support topics. And to Lindy's point, my favorite things about the site and about the like social media pages is seeing people interact and engage in a lot of discourse underneath stories. So it's not just people wanting to interact with the humans themselves, but there's people also wanting to interact with each other. Like, this is the first time that I've seen this opinion and I don't agree with it. And then someone else jumps in with like, here's some more information about this. This is also my lived experience too. And I've seen people have like kind of transformational moments. I've seen people get really keyboard warrior-ish, like, and it runs the range. But I think that these stories are informing people and folks are doing it with their own voices, and that's really important. I can say that reading through so many of the stories, and especially like spending time with the stories that were being considered for the book, whether they made it in or they were stories that were in earlier edits, I really feel like those stories especially have kind of imprinted on me. And there are many of those that felt kind of validating to worldviews. There were some of them that, again, felt like challenging to worldviews. And what happened with a lot of them that felt challenging was this like really, really deep humanizing, this recognition that like both their opinion and like their action that is being depicted in this story that they're telling is very different to my own worldview, potentially even like there's something that I don't just disagree with, but like has an impact on my life. I'm recognizing that in this moment, while like they had power and autonomy over their story being told, once they agreed for it to be a part of the book, and I want to recognize that like this is a human being and should be honored for sharing their story.
I really appreciate when people are getting into these conversations. And, like you said, Tunde, someone might say, I don't agree with what you're saying. And they have a valid point. And even if I don't agree with what they're saying, I need to remind myself, this isn't Humans of St. Louis whose opinions I agree with. It's Humans of St. Louis. And so people are able to jump onto it and get into this rich discussion so that hopefully when others jump into the comment section, they're learning as well.
Since Tende mentioned the book, let's pivot to that. Tell us about the Humans of St. Louis book.
So we had noticed that for a long time, the stories we were just feeding the page pretty regularly, pretty much daily. And these stories were still so relevant, but they were kind of getting buried in the feed. So we had seen that other humans of sites in the US and around the world had compiled books. And we had the idea to take it on to be able to come up with a publication of our own.
Everything is already online. It's true. Like the hundreds of stories that are included in this book are online, as are hundreds and hundreds of other stories as well. And they're all important. And also, when we were making this book, Lindy came to me and said, "Do you remember what we did in the gallery? I want to do that, but like huge." An aesthetic thing that people can hold in their hands. I want to turn it into something that like people can have in their homes, that they can have in their classrooms, that can like inform them in some way, or like people will just like have an opportunity to look at stories in a way that they haven't otherwise.
The thing that was the most important to me, because I knew these stories were going to be in really good hands, was to find folks who were currently in St. Louis. Whether you're living here now, you've been here for a while, or you're from here, I really felt strongly about having a team that we could put together that had experience with this city and living in this city to be able to make this book.
One of the beautiful things about this is the folks who came together had different opinions of what like St. Louis looked like, came from different parts of St. Louis, people who were born and raised here. There were people who were like newer transplants. There were people who have lived here for a long time. There were activists, people coming to it from a design background, and all sorts of different personalities involved. And that it felt like St. Louis, the way that it shaped the book. Like me on my own, I couldn't have been like the only hands on this. It would have looked like my version of St. Louis. Elaine on her own couldn't have been the only hands on this. Lindy only hands on this, etc. That I think that when you are thinking about any space and you're wanting to share about a community, it's really helpful to think about the fact that there are a lot of different humans that make up spaces. And so I guess I would kind of offer that to anybody who's like thinking about making something that's meant to represent a community, is like recognize that like if it's just one voice, it probably doesn't actually represent the community.
Before I came here, there was nothing I could look at that was just about the people of St. Louis to get a better understanding of the city. And I'll just say that after working on this project for as long as I have, and then working on the book project for another 5 years with the team that we brought together, it is so cool to have this compilation that was put together for people to now get a sense of how to describe St. Louis. There are numerous ways to do it. Some people want to focus on the things that are free and entertaining and like all of these things. Some people want to focus on the stuff that seems to bring us all down as a community. And there's truth in all of it. And there's still more as St. Louis continues to evolve. So what I love is that if you pick up this compilation, it's an example of like almost 500 pages of how to describe St. Louis. And then folks can gift it to someone to say, oh, you're coming to work for St. Louis. You're coming to work, or you're like coming to school because you're coming to St. Louis, or you've lived here for a while and we'd like to give you something as like a gift to kind of commemorate your time here. It's a nice thing to give someone who's new to the city, who's experienced the city. And that's what our hope was in making it.
One of the things that I was really focused on was the flow of the stories and the way that they were informing each other, the identities of the people, the stories that were being told, and how they informed the next one that the person would read. There were moments that I got really excited about, and there were moments that I got really angry about. And what we wanted was a book where people's stories were like both telling a story about St. Louis, like as a whole, collectively, and also really being uplifted in their own, even if the stories conflicted. Like, even if we had the story of a person with one political mindset next to another very different political ideology that they follow, or people from like this part of St. Louis versus a different part of St. Louis, that we were honoring those folks' stories and sharing them in a way that like gets people to think and does a little bit of like kind of like cross-cultural sharing potentially with folks who may not be familiar with some of the stories that are being shared or some of the like communities that are being talked about, because there are like the stories in here are real. It's not all like wonderful sunshine stories, and it was important that the way that we curated them and the way that we placed them together, that it didn't just contribute to what the existing narrative like has been for at least the past like 10 years or so.
We talked a lot as a group of like the importance of sharing parts of that. If that's how people view St. Louis, which might be more negative, and they're very bold to say it in an interview, how do we share that in the book? Because like you were saying today, we didn't want to shy away from what the reality is of how folks perceive St. Louis. We want to highlight it. We wanted to show great parts about it and the people in it. But that's a really real sentiment also. I remember that there was a girl downtown that I had met, and she had said, I'm here today. My parents don't know I'm here. And she was over 21. And her quote was so poignant. And I really wanted it for the book too. She had said like, oh, you know, if you come to St. Louis and you see the arch, then you've gone too far. Like you don't want to get any closer.
What I, as someone who lives in the city and have lived in the city for like almost 20 years now, think of as like big misconceptions that happen both between the city and the county, that happen between people who live like right next to each other. And personally, it's frustrating to me. And it's also a reality that we live in. So statements get made about one place or the other that seem to like really miss the richness that exists in each place. And there were a couple of stories like that the humans didn't feel excited about being, you know, immortalized on a book page with those stories. Like they existed online, sure, but a book is different. And while that was really frustrating, it was like, I can understand that. I think I might feel the same way. I know that like I learned some things even with some of the stories that were shared, and I anticipate that any person could. And so this book was designed with that in mind. And a person could go through the site and like find all of this content absolutely on their own. And this feels like something that we're getting feedback and messages from people saying like, oh, my child was looking through the book and they started asking me this question about this particular story. And I got to talk to them about this person's lived experience, which wasn't a topic that we had gotten to yet. And it felt like a really easy and beautiful way to share. I also think about like offices and places that spend lots of money on modules that have like constructed scenarios about people in order to teach about like other human beings and their ways of living. And sometimes I'm in those spaces and I'm like, but people actually exist. Like real people are sitting in this office with some of these lived experiences that like you've depicted close, but not quite exactly on the screen. And the stuff in the book it's the real lived experiences of the people who have like chosen to give the gift of sharing their stories.
I love hearing other people talk about what this storytelling does for them. So like, yeah, we go out there, we get the stories, we created the book. And I can say like, I hope people are more open to their neighbor, to the stranger that they wouldn't talk to in the street. But honestly, what's really beautiful is to hear how people are inspired from the book. And in their own ways, they're figuring out what to do with the book. So one gentleman reached out and he runs a production company and he's like, I never knew about your site. And then when it came out, because we ended up donating a copy to every city and county library, he got his hands on one. And he's like, this would be really fun to do for the Fringe Festival. Can we adapt your book to make a play so folks can hear what it may have been like when you interviewed, and just have some actors up on stage? And I love that idea, because I think in terms of a still photograph and the transcribed quote from the moment I met these folks. And here you have this artist who's like, no, we're taking it to a whole nother level. What do you think? Do you want to collaborate? I love that. I think that's just marvelous. That's one example. I also think, like, and I feel really strongly about this, the people in the book, they matter. Like, we all matter. And the folks that we asked to be a part of it, they signed a model release. They knew they were going to be a part of something. But when they reach back out and they're like, I knew I was going to be a part of something, but now that I see it and hold it and I see myself in it, it's just phenomenal. Like, can I get another copy for my family? Or I was telling Tunde before we spoke that even the gentleman on the cover, Jerome, he reached out today, and it's like 9 a.m. I'm on my way to my meeting, and he called me up. He's like, hey, Lindy, I'm just calling to see how you are. I'm good. I was like, okay. Do you want to get together? It's so nice to have this back and forth from people who are just everyday folks in St. Louis. I think leadership's a big thing too. That wasn't something I anticipated so much, but like, you have folks who volunteer for these roles, or, they have roles that are really high up and they're making big decisions in their company that affect others who work there, or affects, changes made in the city. And if they're able to look through this book to get some inspiration or to be challenged in some way, I think that's been kind of a beautiful thing I didn't anticipate people talking about either.
Yeah, I would add to that like, you actually touched on it when you talked about people being inspired. I'm also thinking of pride, that within St. Louis, like, there's all sorts of different feelings about, like, the city, the county, about living here. And what I didn't want, what I knew I absolutely did not want to contribute to, was a sob story about St. Louis, or more of the conversation about the division that exists. That is real, it's important, and it's absolutely important that we're talking about it. And it doesn't have to be everything. There's a lot of richness here. There's a lot of beauty here. The people here create that. And we've had people reaching out to us like, I live outside of St. Louis now, but I'm from St. Louis, and this book has landed in my lap, and I am so full of joy. Like, I haven't heard it talked about in this way. I haven't seen it depicted in this way. And I want to buy more of this book and give to other people where I am now. And that feels really big.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories. We appreciate your time. You can purchase the book online at humansofstl.org. Thank you for watching. Until next time, continue to be inspired.